I built and exited a multiple 7-figure service business for over $6 million. And it wasn't by working harder, but by designing systems that stopped the company from relying upon me. Before that, I was running a business that needed me for everything. And from the outside, it looked successful. But inside, I was living in a constant state of pressure where I'd wake up in the middle of the night wired, I'd go to bed with my mind racing, and my days were spent firefighting problems that only I could solve. I used to convince myself that this is what it meant to be locked in. This is what it took to be focused as an entrepreneur. But it wasn't. It was anxiety, and I was the problem. I was the bottleneck, the operator, I was the glue. And it was draining me mentally, emotionally, and physically. And even though the business was working, I felt trapped. I was completely misaligned with the life that I actually wanted. And it all came to a head one night when I had the full-blown panic attack. That was the moment when I realized that the way that I was working was unsustainable. It wasn't freeing me. If anything, it was destroying me. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I think about building a business that doesn't depend on the founder. And the shift was the one thing that changed everything. At the time, I genuinely believed that building a great business meant outworking everyone else, even if it crushed me in the process. But what nobody warned me was about how being the bottleneck doesn't break you all at once. It quietly consumes your mental space. It drains your energy, and eventually it erodes your sense of identity. My business ran on my availability, my judgment, and my speed of response. And the fact that I was the only one who really knew how everything worked. Doing everything myself felt safer, faster, like the only way to keep standards higher. But the sign it wasn't sustainable wasn't burnout. It was that I couldn't switch off. I would go to bed and my brain would be wired. I'd wake up with my mind already racing, and slowly over time, I realized that I started resenting the very business that I'd built. The trap was simple. The more the business grew, the more that I had to jump in to fix things, make every decision, and carry the whole thing on my shoulders. And the moment that I realized this wasn't a time management problem, but a structural one, was when I was lying awake in the middle of the night, heart racing, not because something had happened, but because months of being on had finally caught up with me. Time was passing either way. The only question was whether the business could move without me. My body had shut down before I was willing to admit the truth. The way that I was building the business was breaking me. Only then did I stop believing that pushing harder and doing more would ever fix a broken structure. This is the model that I now build around. Because businesses should be architected to remove founder dependency, not optimized to extract more effort from the founder. Instead of trying to carry the business, I started believing that the business itself had to carry the weight, not me. And not through more discipline and not through working harder, but by designing something that could function without my constant presence. You see, most people think that the problem is that they're not working hard enough. But what I've learned is that usually it's down to a lack of structure. My job wasn't to lay every brick, it was to design the architecture. Architects design the blueprint so that the structure can hold itself. And when the blueprint's right, the business doesn't need you everywhere. It doesn't rely on your energy, your memory, or your constant decision making. It carries its own weight. That shift from trying to be essential to intentionally making myself redundant changed how I built everything that came after. So here's the architecture. If the business is going to stop depending on the founder, it needs to have 3 structural pillars. So the first non-negotiable is clear, and that was ownership and accountability. Because a business can't run without the founder when no one truly owns the outcomes. So for me, this showed up as quick questions, and it wasn't big strategic issues, but more the non-emergencies. So this just showed up with a constant stream of questions like, can I do this? What do you think I should do here? How should we change this? And yes, each one feels harmless on their own, and they were, but together, they trained the business to route responsibility back to me and taught the team that thinking stopped at the founder. So no longer were they thinking for themselves. So what mattered wasn't so much the questions that were being asked, it was why they were being asked. Because when ownership isn't clear, people don't own outcomes. What they do, they rent approval. And so I've seen this pattern with many founders who technically they have a team, but every decision, for whatever reason, still roots back to them. And because of that, They've stayed stuck in the weeds instead of focusing on what actually moved the business forward. So they never had time to focus on the big ticket objectives or the MITs, the most important tasks that would actually move the needle for the business. But once ownership became explicit, and what I mean by that was clarity on who owns what, who decides what, and who is accountable for the outcome, then something very interesting happened. Because those quick questions didn't just slow down. What happened is that they stopped. And not because people stopped caring, but because responsibility finally had a place to live. And so that's the real shift that happens, guys. Yeah, clear ownership doesn't remove leadership. What it removes is dependency. And this is what replaces that I'll do it myself logic. Not more trust, not more effort, but a structure where outcomes are owned without the founder having to hover over the shoulders of their employees every single minute of the day. The second non-negotiable was building systems that can make decisions without me. Now, most founders believe that their value is in decision making, being the one who approves, customizes, and knows best. But for me, more than anything else, this showed up more clearly within the sales pipeline, because every serious prospect meant that I had to create a new proposal, or it might have meant a different scope, or there could potentially have been different pricing and different terms. And even when the business was doing well, sales drained me because every deal required my involvement on some level in order for it to move forward. It felt like I was being helpful, but what I was really doing was teaching the business that progress or growth depended on my availability. And so the shift didn't come from selling harder, it came from designing decision frameworks. And this comprised of clear offers, clear boundaries, and clear rules for what was and wasn't possible. And so once proposals stopped being subjective, and once proposals followed principles instead of preferences, those decisions, they stopped coming to me. Not because the sales slowed, but because the business finally knew how to decide. And this is probably the part that most founders miss. Freedom doesn't come from removing decisions. It comes from designing decisions so that the business can make them without you. When systems make decisions, bottlenecks disappear, your firefighting slows, and your pressure lifts. And it isn't because you're working less, but because the business no longer waits on you to function. And the third non-negotiable was visibility without control. See, most founders don't actually want control. They want certainty, because control requires your presence. Visibility creates certainty without pulling decisions back to you. So before this, I stayed involved, not because I needed to make decisions, but because I didn't know what was actually true unless I was there checking. So I hovered, I micromanaged, I stayed close. And it wasn't to control people, but really just to calm my own nervous system and give me peace of mind. And so the shift came when visibility became structural instead of personal. So that was clear signals and consistent cadence, information that surfaced problems early without requiring my intervention. And this is why I see the biggest relief in founders. The moment that they can step away and still know what's true without having to check everything. Yeah, that need to control slowly starts to disappear. And so visibility, it doesn't replace leadership, but what it does is replace anxiety-driven involvement. And so the moment you have these three elements in place, ownership, decision structure, and visibility, something fundamental changes. Yeah, the founder stops being a bottleneck. Decisions stop flowing through them, and problems stop landing on their desk. And so the ownership creates autonomy, structure removes decision fatigue, and visibility replaces that need for control. And so instead of propping the business up every day, the founder finally steps out of the way so that it can run on its own. And this is the difference between operating a business and designing one. One requires constant effort, the other compounds over time. And most founders don't need a new strategy, but what they need to do is redesign the parts of the business that are still relying upon them. If somebody wanted to move in this direction, the first thing to look at is where founder dependency still exists within their business. The places where the business only moves when they do. And the fastest way to spot the dependency is to ask 3 questions. And these questions are: what stops moving when I'm not there? What breaks the moment that I step away? And where does responsibility always bounce back to me? And these questions aren't about blame, they're about architecture. Letting go doesn't mean lowering standards. It means designing a structure where high standards holds without you. I'm still refining this way of operating, but when I look at my life now, it's a reality that I once thought was impossible. This way of building matters to me because I've lived the cost of doing it the wrong way. And I know how life-changing it can be when a business finally gives you back your peace, your time, and your identity. And so if any part of this video resonated, start paying attention to where your business still depends on you, because that's where your freedom begins.